Welcome to Wild Cowboy Talus. Before you listen, let me know where you're listening from. The sun bleeds across a cracked earth, and justice is as scarce as rain. In this untamed West, some secrets refuse to stay buried, and the burden of truth can weigh heavier than 1,000 pounds of gold. Prepare yourself for a tale of choices made under the shadow of the gallows, where one man's witness becomes another's damnation, and the line between survival and perdition blurs into the dust. This is a story of a silent pact and a deadly reckoning, where the only way out is through the fire. Chapter 1: The Weight of Witness. The wind, a relentless sculptor of the Badlands, whipped dust into Elias Thorne's face, stinging his eyes and caking his parched lips. It tasted of alkali and forgotten promises. Below him, nestled in a serpentine bend of the Dry Fork River, lay the fledgling town of Redemption's Rest. A cruel jest of a name, he'd always thought, for a place that offered little of either. His gelding, Old Blue, snorted, shifting uneasily, sensing the tension that coiled in Elias's gut like a rattler. Elias tightened his grip on the reins, his gaze fixed on the single-story clapboard saloon that dominated the main street. He hadn't sought this town, nor the grim burden it had thrust upon him, but here he was, a silent witness to a truth that now demanded its price. Just 3 days prior, the barren landscape had been a canvas of indifference. Elias, a prospector whose luck ran as dry as the riverbed, had been nursing a meager fire by a hidden spring, far from prying eyes. He'd seen the riders, then a cloud of dust on the horizon, moving with a desperate urgency. 3 of them, silhouetted against the dying sun, pushing their horses hard. He hadn't thought much of it until the moon rose, cold and full, casting stark shadows that played tricks on the eyes. The sound of a single gunshot, sharp and echoing, had cut through the stillness of the desert night. Then another, muffled. Curiosity, a dangerous companion in these parts, had tugged him closer, drawn him to the edge of the rocky bluff overlooking a small, isolated canyon. What he saw then burned itself into his memory, a brand hotter than any branding iron. Below, bathed in the pale and forgiving moonlight, was a scene of brutal efficiency. A stagecoach, overturned and splintered, lay like a broken toy. Scattered around it were the bodies of its guards, still and crumpled. And then, the figures. 4 men, not 3. The 4th had been waiting, a grim sentinel. They were sorting through strong boxes, their faces obscured by bandanas, but their movements were precise, practiced. One of them, a hulking brute with a distinctive limp, was methodically executing the wounded, a chilling thud accompanying each final act. Elias had watched, frozen, his hand instinctively go into the worn Colt at his hip, but he knew any intervention would be suicide. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and hidden only by the grace of darkness. He was just a witness. Then it happened. The leader, a lean man with a scar that snaked from his temple to his jaw, pulled a woman from the wreckage. She struggled, her cries thin and desperate, quickly silenced by a cruel hand. He dragged her to the edge of a deep fissure in the earth, a natural grave. Before he pushed her in, his gaze, sharp as a hawk's, swept the surrounding bluffs. For a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, their eyes met, or so Elias believed. He ducked, pressed himself flat against the rock, his breath held tight in his chest. When he dared to look again, they were gone, leaving only the silence, the overturned stage, and the dead. He'd ridden for a day and a half, the image seared behind his eyelids, the chilling realization of being seen, or at least suspected, a cold knot in his stomach. He tried to shake it off, convince himself it was a trick of the light, the paranoia of a man alone in the vast and forgiving wilderness. But the image of that cold, knowing stare lingered. Redemption's Rest, a collection of ramshackle buildings under a relentless sky, had appeared on the horizon like a mirage. He'd ridden in for supplies, a moment of respite, hoping to lose himself in the anonymity of the frontier. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. He'd spotted them almost immediately, the hulking brute with the limp, his face now unmasked, sitting on a saloon porch, whittling a piece of wood. Then the lean leader, his scar a stark white line against his sun-darkened skin, emerging from the general store. Elias felt a primal chill, the hair on his arms standing on end. He was in the lion's den. He hitched Old Blue to a rail, trying to appear nonchalant, his hand subtly brushing the butt of his Colt. The saloon doors swung open as he approached, emitting a discordant piano tune and the low rumble of male voices. He pushed inside, the sudden dimness a relief after the harsh glare of the sun. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer, sawdust, and unwashed bodies. He found an empty stool at the bar, ordered a whiskey, and kept his back to the wall, his eyes scanning the room. The hulking brute, whose name he now knew from hushed whispers at the bar was Gus, was at a card table in the corner, his heavy boots thudding softly as he played. The scarred man, referred to only as Silas, was nowhere to be seen, but Elias felt his presence like a shadow. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, the cheap liquor burning a path down his throat, doing little to quench the rising unease. Then, a voice, low and gravelly, spoke from directly behind him. "Fancy a game, stranger." Elias stiffened, his blood running cold. He turned slowly, his hand hovering over his weapon. Standing there was Silas, his face unreadable, that unsettling scar a stark emblem. His eyes, the same ones that had swept the bluff 3 nights ago, bored into Elias. There was no accusation, no threat, just an unnerving stillness. "Perhaps another time," Elias managed, his voice a little rougher than he intended. Silas gave a slow, predatory smile. "You look like a man who's seen things, stranger. Things best kept to himself." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the saloon's din. "You saw everything, didn't you, cowboy? Now you must take responsibility or we both perish." The words hung in the air, a chilling pronouncement. Elias felt a jolt of raw fear, but also a flicker of defiance. This wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration. Silas knew. He had been seen. The desert's vastness had offered no anonymity, no escape. Elias was no longer just a witness, he was a participant, dragged into a deadly dance he never asked for. The weight of what he knew, and the impossible choice now laid bare before him, settled heavy on his shoulders. The dusty streets of Redemption's Rest had just become his personal purgatory. Chapter 2, The Coils of the Serpent. The echo of Silas's words, "You saw everything, didn't you, cowboy? Now you must take responsibility or we both perish," vibrated in the stale air of the saloon. A sinister melody played just for Elias. He felt the eyes of every man in the room, or so it seemed, though most were oblivious, lost in their cards or their liquor. Silas's smile hadn't reached his eyes, they remained cold, assessing, like a predator sizing up its prey. Elias knew then, with chilling certainty, that this wasn't an offer of partnership, but a declaration of ownership. His silence, a secret shared, had become a brand. Responsibility for what, exactly? Elias asked, his voice low, a carefully constructed mask of indifference. He took another slow sip of his whiskey, trying to gauge the man before him. Silas wasn't a blustering brute. He was coiled, observant, dangerous in a way that spoke of intelligence and cold calculation. Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "For keeping our little secret. For making sure nobody else goes asking questions. A man with your discerning eye could be mighty useful, or mighty inconvenient." He paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. The stage, stranger. It wasn't just a simple hall. There are eyes, important eyes, looking for what was lost. We need to make sure they look in the wrong direction, or better yet, stop looking altogether. And you, Elias Thorne, are now part of that solution. Elias felt a surge of cold fury, quickly suppressed. To deny it would be to invite immediate violence. To accept would be to damn himself. And what if I just ride out of here? Forget I ever saw a damn thing. Silas leaned back slightly, his expression unchanging. "You could try, but the desert has a way of remembering faces. And my boys have a knack for tracking. Besides," he added, his gaze sweeping around the saloon, "where would you go? This land is big, but it ain't big enough for a man trying to outrun a shadow. And your shadow, cowboy, just got a lot longer." Elias knew he was trapped. Silas wasn't giving him a choice, he was presenting him with a terrifying ultimatum. Join them, become complicit, or become another anonymous victim in the endless sands. He considered the long ride out, the pursuit, the inevitable confrontation. He was good with a gun, but he wasn't foolish. He was alone, and Silas had a gang. "What do you want me to do?" Elias finally asked, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Silas's smile widened, a genuine and settling display of triumph. "For now, nothing but keep your eyes open. And your mouth shut. Make yourself scarce, but not too scarce. Redemption's Rest is our home now, Elias. And everyone in it knows their place. You're just learning yours. He clapped Elias on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a brand than a greeting, then turned and sauntered away, melting back into the shadows of the saloon. Elias watched him go, his hand unconsciously dropping to the worn butt of his Colt. The cheap whiskey now tasted like poison. He was no longer a silent witness. He was a pawn, caught in the coils of a serpent. Over the next few days, Elias observed the town with a new, grim clarity. Redemption's Rest was a pressure cooker, the lid held down by fear. The gang wasn't just passing through, they were tightening their grip. He saw Gus, the hulking brute with the limp, now a constant presence on the street, his menacing glare enough to silence any disgruntled murmurs. He saw other gang members, hard-faced men with restless eyes, frequenting the general store, the livery, even the small, neglected church, their presence a palpable threat. The sheriff, a portly man named Jedediah Pike, seemed more interested in the bottom of a bottle than the well-being of his constituents. Elias watched him exchange hushed and comfortable words with one of Silas's men outside the saloon, a clear sign of his compromise. Shopkeepers, who once greeted customers with boisterous calls, now spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously. The townsfolk, thin and weary, moved with a stoic resignation, their gazes downcast. Redemption's Rest wasn't living, it was enduring. Elias struck up a quiet conversation with Old Man Hemlock, a grizzled prospector who occasionally frequented the same bar as Elias, nursing a single beer for hours. Hemlock's face was a roadmap of sun and hardship, but his eyes held a sharp, knowing intelligence. Silas and his boys, Hemlock rasped, his voice barely audible above the saloon din. They ain't just here for the dust in their boots. They're here for the gold in these hills, or what they think is here. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the sawdust. Heard 'em talking at the general store. Something about a shipment, a big one, expected soon. Said they got informants, even up in the territorial capital. Elias's mind clicked. The stagecoach. It wasn't just a random target. It was a planned ambush. And the contents. What kind of shipment? Hemlock shrugged, his old eyes narrowing. To know for sure. Rumors. Gold maybe. Or something even more valuable. Silas ain't the kind for petty thievery. He aims high, that one. And he don't leave witnesses. His gaze lingered on Elias for a moment, a knowing glint in their depths, as if he suspected Elias knew more than he let on. Elias also noticed a young woman, Maev, who worked behind the bar, her movements fluid and efficient despite the oppressive atmosphere. She possessed a fiery intelligence in her eyes that even the grim reality of Redemption's Rest couldn't extinguish. She rarely spoke to the gang, serving them with a practiced, distant politeness. One afternoon, while Gus was playing cards, Maev deliberately accidentally spilled a tray of drinks near his table, causing a commotion. While Gus roared in anger, Maev exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance with Elias. It was a fleeting moment, but it hinted at a shared defiance. Later that day, as Elias was getting his horse watered at the livery, he overheard a snatch of conversation between two of Silas's men. The Widow's Peak mine, Silas wants it scouted by tomorrow. Says there's more than just copper in that ground. The Widow's Peak mine. Elias knew it. An old, abandoned copper mine outside of town, rumored to have been shut down not because of depleted ore, but because of a cave-in that buried a wealthy prospector and his secret. Copper wasn't what Silas was after. It was something else. That evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in violent hues of orange and purple, Elias found himself back at the bar, nursing another whiskey. He saw Silas across the room, sharing a laugh with Gus, their faces etched in the dim lamplight. Silas's eyes met his for a moment, a silent acknowledgement, a renewed assertion of control. Elias felt the walls closing in. He was a silent partner in crime, his very presence in Redemption's Rest a tacit agreement to Silas's terms. But the words of Old Man Hemlock, the knowing glance from Maev, and the overheard whispers about the Widow's Peak mine began to coalesce into a terrifying picture. Silas wasn't just a highwayman. He was a spider, spinning a web of control, and Redemption's Rest was its epicenter. And Elias, by virtue of what he'd witnessed, was caught right in the middle. The woman, the stagecoach, the stolen goods, it was all connected. And the truth, he realized, was far more dangerous than he had imagined. His silence was complicity, but his voice, should he choose to use it, would be his death knell. The coils were tightening. Chapter 3, Whispers in the Dust. The weight of Silas's ultimatum pressed down on Elias like the desert heat, a constant, oppressive burden. Every creak of the saloon floorboards, every shadow stretching across the street, seemed to whisper of his predicament. He was a man adrift in a sea of his own conscience, torn between the instinct to flee and the undeniable pull of a responsibility he hadn't sought. Running would indeed be an admission of guilt, a tacit endorsement of Silas's crimes. But staying, playing along, meant dancing with the devil. He ordered a plate of stale beans and tough jerky from the saloon cook, the food doing little to settle the turmoil in his gut. He thought of the woman, her desperate cry, the brutal efficiency of her disposal. The image, stark and unforgiving, refused to fade. He wasn't a hero, never had been. He was a prospector, a drifter, a man who generally minded his own business. But what he'd witnessed that moonlit night transcended mere observation. It demanded action. Yet, what action could a lone man take against a well-organized, ruthless gang that held an entire town in its thrall? Elias decided his best chance lay in knowledge. He needed to understand Silas's operation, his motivations, and most importantly, his vulnerabilities. He adopted a new persona, a quiet, observant man, content to drink his whiskey and play a hand of cards, but always listening, always watching. He frequented the general store, pretending to examine goods while discreetly observing the interactions between townsfolk and Silas's men. He spent hours at the livery, grooming Old Blue, his ears perked for stray conversations. One afternoon, while Elias was securing a new horseshoe for Old Blue, he overheard a heated exchange from the stable office. It was Silas and another gang member, a nervous-looking man named Pike, not the sheriff, but a younger, shifty-eyed fellow. "The plans, Pike. Where are the damn plans for the Silver Creek vault?" Silas's voice was a low growl, filled with menace. They're still with Jedediah, Silas. He said he needed more time. "He's nervous," Pike stammered, his voice trembling. "Nervous? He'll be dead if he doesn't produce them," Silas snarled. "The bank in Silver Creek is our next play, and I need those blueprints. The stagecoach was just a warm-up. This is the real prize." Elias's blood ran cold. The Silver Creek Bank, a much larger, more heavily guarded institution than the pitiful stagecoach. And Jedediah could only be Sheriff Jedediah Pike. The sheriff wasn't just compromised, he was actively collaborating, a fact that sickened Elias. The stagecoach, Silas had called it a warm-up. The true scope of Silas's ambition was starting to reveal itself. Later that day, Elias was sitting outside the saloon, whittling a piece of wood, when Gus approached him. Gus was a brute, but not entirely stupid. He watched Elias with a suspicious glint in his eye. "You've been asking a lot of questions, stranger. About the Widow's Peak. About Old Man Hemlock's ramblings." Elias didn't flinch. "Just curious. A man gets bored out here, and Hemlock talks a lot of nonsense about hidden gold." He gave a nonchalant shrug. Gus snorted. "Hemlock knows more than nonsense. And you ain't just curious. Silas is watching you. Don't forget that little talk you had. You got a responsibility now. Don't go getting ideas about being a hero, cowboy. This ain't that kind of story." He leaned closer, his breath rank with whiskey. "Some secrets are best left buried. And some witnesses, well, they just disappear." The veiled threat was clear, the warning chilling. Elias felt the familiar prickle of fear, but beneath it, a spark of resolve ignited. Gus's words had solidified it. He couldn't run. If he did, he would forever carry the shame of cowardice and the burden of those he left behind. That evening, Liv, the saloon girl, passed by Elias as he sat at the bar. As she placed a fresh drink in front of him, her fingers brushed his, and a small, folded piece of paper slipped into his palm. Her eyes met his for a split second, a silent instruction. He tucked the paper into his pocket without looking at it. Later, in the privacy of his cramped room above the livery, Elias unfolded the note. The handwriting was neat, elegant. "Heard them talking. Widow's Peak. They think the old man who owned it, Bartholomew Finch, left more than just copper. Something hidden. His family, back east, they're still looking for it. A Pinkerton agent was asking about it in Silver Creek just last month. Tall man, scar over his left eye. He mentioned the stagecoach too, said it was carrying documents related to Finch's estate. The note wasn't signed, but Elias knew who it was from. Lev, a Pinkerton agent. Bartholomew Finch, the Widow's Peak mine, the stagecoach. It was all beginning to weave together. The murdered woman on the stagecoach, could she have been connected to Finch's estate? Or perhaps even a relative trying to retrieve these documents? The stolen goods weren't just money, they were information, leverage, a key to something far greater. Silas wasn't just robbing, he was orchestrating. Elias realized his task was not just to survive, but to unravel this knot. He wasn't just trying to save his own skin, he was holding the thread that could bring down a much larger operation. The burden of truth was heavy, but now, mixed with it, was a glimmer of purpose. He wasn't just a witness anymore, he was a player. And his first move, he decided, would be a dangerous one. He needed to revisit the scene of the crime, the canyon. He needed to find what Silas and his men had missed. Chapter 4. The Ghost of the Canyon. The sun beat down with unrelenting ferocity as Elias rode Old Blue away from Redemption's Rest, a canteen sloshing against his hip, his rifle secured in its scabbard. He told anyone who asked, mostly the suspicious gaze of Gus from the saloon porch, that he was heading out to check some old claims. The lie felt thin, transparent, but he rode with a determined air, hoping to convey nothing but a prospector's endless, futile hope. His true destination, however, lay miles in the opposite direction, toward the desolate canyon where the stagecoach lay mangled, a silent testament to Silas's brutality. He rode hard, pushing Old Blue through the scrub brush and over rocky terrain, the memory of Mav's note burning in his mind. Documents related to Finch's estate. It wasn't just about the money on the stagecoach, it was about the information. Silas wanted something specific, something that would unlock a deeper secret. And the Pinkerton agent's involvement meant the stakes were far higher than just a simple bandit raid. By mid-morning, he reached the familiar, stark landscape surrounding the canyon. The air here felt heavier, imbued with the lingering scent of death and the echoes of violence. He dismounted, tying Old Blue to a scraggly mesquite, and approached the rim of the canyon cautiously. The overturned stagecoach was still there, a broken sentinel against the backdrop of ochre cliffs. Buzzards circled lazily high above, a grim, patient welcome. He descended into the canyon, his boots crunching on loose scree. The scene was as he remembered it, perhaps even more haunting in the harsh daylight. The splintered wood, the scattered luggage, the dark stains on the earth that told their own silent story. He meticulously searched the wreckage, his eyes scanning for anything out of place, anything missed by Silas's men in their haste. He overturned broken seats, probed under floorboards, sifted through torn leather bags. Nothing, just the detritus of a violent end. He moved to the spot where the guards had fallen, searching the ground around them. He found spent bullet casings, standard point for .5 caliber, common enough. Then, near where he remembered the woman being dragged, he saw it. A glint of metal almost entirely buried in the sandy soil. He knelt, digging with his bare hands, and unearthed a small, ornate locket. It was tarnished and slightly dented, but still beautiful. He pried it open. Inside, on one side, was a faded tintype photograph of a stern-faced man with a thick beard. Bartholomew Finch, he surmised. On the other side, tucked behind a thin piece of glass, was a tiny, intricately folded piece of parchment. With trembling fingers, Elias unfolded it. It was a crude map, hand-drawn, showing the outline of the Widow's Peak mine, but with a specific tunnel marked with a bold X, and scrawled beneath it, in a small, tight hand, were the words, Finch's Folly. Not copper, but silver. Under the red capstone, keep this safe, my dearest Eleanor. For our future. Eleanor. That must have been the murdered woman. Finch's daughter, perhaps, or his wife, carrying her family's true inheritance. And Silas hadn't been after copper at the Widow's Peak. He was after the silver. A hidden vein, a secret mine. This map was the key. He quickly tucked the locket and the map into his inner coat pocket. As he rose, a chilling sensation prickled the back of his neck. He wasn't alone. The distinct sound of a loose rock clattering down the canyon wall shattered the oppressive silence. Elias instinctively dropped to a crouch, his hand flying to his Colt. From the shadows of an overhang, a figure emerged. He was tall, lean, with a weathered face and a distinctive scar that ran diagonally across his left eyebrow. the Pinkerton agent. He was a man of quiet intensity, his eyes sharp and assessing, taking in Elias's position, his drawn weapon, and the wreckage around them. Well, the agent said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of surprise. Looks like I'm not the only one with a nose for buried truths. Elias Thorne, I presume. You've been making quite a name for yourself in Redemption's Rest. Elias remained silent, his Colt still aimed, his mind racing. This man knew his name. Had Silas already been spreading rumors about him? Or was this agent just that good? Who are you? Agent Malcolm Mac Granger, Pinkerton National Detective Agency, the man replied, slowly raising his hands, showing he held no weapon. And I've been tracking Silas Blackwood and his particular brand of villainy for months, especially since a certain stagecoach, carrying a valuable package, disappeared 3 nights ago. Granger's gaze drifted to Elias's pocket, a subtle, knowing look. He suspected Elias had found something. That valuable package wasn't just coin, was it, Thorne? It was a key. A map, perhaps. Something to unlock Old Man Finch's real treasure at the Widow's Peak. Elias hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapon. This wasn't a gang member. This was someone who could help, or complicate things immeasurably. You know a lot. It's my business to know, Granger said, stepping closer. And it's my business to bring Silas Blackwood to justice for the murder of Eleanor Finch and the robbery of her family's inheritance. And it seems, Mr. Thorne, that you were an eyewitness to that particular atrocity. Silas knows you saw him. And now, so do I. He's not going to let a witness like you walk away. A shiver ran down Elias's spine, but it wasn't just fear. It was the confirmation that he wasn't alone in this fight, though this new ally also meant new dangers. Suddenly, a distant halloo echoed from the canyon rim. Both men froze. A small group of riders were silhouetted against the sky. Silas and Gus. They were out scouting, perhaps checking on Elias's claims, or perhaps they'd simply tracked his dust. They're early, Granger muttered, his expression grim. He must suspect something. Looks like your little detour wasn't as discreet as you hoped, Thorne. Elias felt a cold dread. Silas's suspicion was growing. The tension between them was about to snap. He had found the truth, but now he had to protect it, and himself, from a relentless enemy. We need to move. Now. Granger nodded, his gaze hardening. Looks like you just picked a side, Mr. Thorne. Welcome to the fight. The weight of witness had just been compounded by the burden of a dangerous alliance. Chapter 5, A Pact Forged in Blood. The sharp crack of a rifle shot ricocheted through the canyon, narrowly missing Elias's head and kicking up a spray of dust beside his boot. Silas and his men were already descending, their shouts echoing menacingly. Thorne, I knew you couldn't be trusted, you sneaking coyote. Silas's voice, a whip crack of fury, cut through the air. They saw us, Elias yelled to Granger, instinctively drawing his Colt and returning fire, aiming for the figures scrambling down the treacherous slope. He knew it was a futile gesture, but it bought them precious seconds. This way, Granger barked, already moving, his long strides carrying him towards a narrow fissure in the canyon wall, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. There's a hidden path, used by old prospectors. Might give us a chance. Elias didn't hesitate. He plunged into the crevice after Granger, the rough rock scraping against his clothes. They moved quickly, scrambling over boulders and ducking under low overhangs, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a small, secluded gully, hidden from above. They collapsed, gasping, their hearts hammering. Close call, Granger panted, wiping sweat from his brow. Silas ain't one for second chances. Elias nodded, still catching his breath. He pulled out the locket and the map, showing them to Granger. This is what they missed. The real prize. Granger's eyes widened as he examined the map. Silver Creek, Finch's Folly, a hidden silver vein. This changes everything. Silas isn't just a robber. He's trying to corner a hidden fortune. This is why he wants those bank plans to move the silver, or to launder it, or to get to a safety deposit box where Finch might have kept more secrets. He also mentioned a major score at the Silver Creek Bank, Elias added. Said the stagecoach was just a warm-up. He's got the sheriff, Jedediah Pike, on his payroll, providing blueprints. Granger grimaced. Jedediah Pike. Knew he was dirty. This confirms it. He looked at Elias, his expression serious. Listen, Thorin, you're in deep now. Silas saw you, not just here, but at the stagecoach. He knows you're a liability. He'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. But you also have something he desperately wants: this map. And you've heard things, seen things, that only I and a few others would believe. So what's the plan, Pinkerton? Elias asked, his voice tinged with weary resolve. We can't outrun them forever. No, Granger agreed. But we can outsmart them. Silas won't expect you to walk back into his den. That's what we're going to do. You're going to go back to Redemption's Rest. You're going to convince Silas you're on his side. That you were just out checking claims and got ambushed by rival prospectors or some such story. Elias stared at him, aghast. You want me to walk into the lion's mouth? He'll kill me. Not if you're useful to him, Granger countered, his eyes sharp. You've got a reputation for being handy with a gun, a good tracker. Silas is ambitious, but he's also short-handed for his grand scheme. He needs reliable men. If you present him with this map, as if you found it, and offer it to him, it'll buy you time, and his trust. You become indispensable. You'll be our eyes and ears on the inside. Elias clenched his jaw. It was a suicide mission, but Granger's logic was disturbingly sound. It was the only way to get close, to gather the intelligence needed to bring Silas down. And he had to bring Silas down, not just for his own survival, but for Eleanor Finch, for the compromised town, for the sake of some semblance of justice. And you? Elias asked. I'll be working from the outside, Granger replied. I'll take this information, verify the bank plans, alert my agency, and try to get federal marshals involved. But it will take time. Time that you'll be buying us. You'll be gathering the specifics, the exact timing of the Silver Creek heist, their full roster, their hideouts, any other dirty dealings. Elias considered it, the enormity of the risk, the profound weight of responsibility. You saw everything. Now you must take responsibility or we both perish. Silas's words echoed in his mind, but now they held a new meaning. It wasn't just Silas threatening him, it was the entire situation. He had indeed seen everything, and now he had to take responsibility, or Redemption's Rest, and perhaps more, would perish under Silas's ruthless ambition. All right, Elias said, his voice firm, the decision made. I'll do it. But if he so much as looks at me funny, I'm putting a bullet in him. Granger nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. Understood. We need a way to communicate. See that old, abandoned well, a few miles north of town, near the Twin Mesas. It's dry. Leave a message there, hidden under a loose rock. If you have urgent information, I'll check it every other night. They spent the next hour planning Elias's return, concocting a plausible story for Silas, and devising signals. Elias handed the locket to Granger, keeping only the folded nap. Proof for your agency, he said, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the canyon in hues of red and gold. Elias mounted Old Blue. He looked back at Granger, a solitary figure in the vast and forgiving landscape. He was now an actor on a deadly stage, performing for the most dangerous audience of his life. He rode back towards Redemption's Rest, the map of Finch's folly pressed against his chest, a pact forged in blood and desperation. He was walking into the lion's den, not as a victim, but as a Trojan horse. Chapter 6, Whispers of Rebellion. Elias rode into Redemption's Rest under the pallid light of a quarter moon, his horse appearing exhausted, and Elias himself looking suitably disheveled. He led Old Blue directly to the livery, careful to keep his face obscured by the brim of his hat. He paid the stable boy, exchanged a few grunted words about hard riding and empty claims, and then made his way to the saloon. The air inside was thick with stale smoke and cheap perfume, a familiar scent that now felt laced with danger. Silas was at his usual corner table, playing poker with Gus and two other gang members, their faces grim under the flickering lamplight. Elias approached slowly, his gaze steady, his hand resting casually near his Colt. Well, well, look what the dust storm dragged in, Silas drawled, his eyes narrowing, assessing Elias with an unnerving intensity. Thought you might have ridden off to greener pastures, cowboy. Or perhaps found a snake to share your secrets with. Elias scoffed, affecting a weary exasperation. Greener pastures. More like a damn ambush. To rough-looking fellas. Thought they could take my supplies. Had to teach him a lesson. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over Silas and his men, a calculated challenge in his eyes. But not before they mentioned something interesting. He pulled the crumpled map from his coat, and folding it slowly and laying it on the table. Silas's eyes immediately fixed on it, a predatory gleam replacing his suspicion. Gus leaned forward, his hulking frame casting a shadow over the table. "Finch's Folly," Elias said, pointing to the X on the map. "Old man Finch's hidden silver vein at the Widow's Peak. I found this on one of the fellas who jumped me. Seems they were after it too. Heard whispers of it in town. Figured you might be interested." He watched Silas carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. Silas picked up the map, his fingers tracing the crude lines. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face, a truly unnerving sight. "Silver, hey, I knew old Finch was hiding something more than copper. And a map. You've done well, Thorn. Very well indeed. Looks like your curiosity might actually be useful after all." Gus grumbled. "Still don't trust him, Silas. He was out at the canyon, sniffing around." Silas held up a hand, silencing Gus. "The canyon? Were you, Thorn, checking for more ambushes?" His gaze was piercing, seeking out any hint of a lie. Elias met his stare unflinchingly. "Ambushers, or whatever other desperate souls are out there, Silas. This country's full of them. I found this map on one of their bodies. Figured it was worth more to you than them." He gave a slight shrug, a masterful display of feigned indifference. Silas studied him for a long moment, then clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that now felt less like a brand and more like a tenuous embrace of a viper. "All right, Thorn. You proved your worth. We'll talk about the silver and the Silver Creek plans. Seems you've earned your keep." Elias felt a cold knot of dread loosen slightly, replaced by a surge of nervous energy. He was in. He had bought himself time. Over the next few days, Elias became a fixture within Silas's inner circle. He attended their planning sessions, listened to their crude boasts, and observed their methods. He learned that Silas's ambition was boundless. The Silver Creek Bank was indeed the primary target, but the silver from Finch's Folly was the long-term play, meant to bankroll a larger, more permanent outlaw enterprise. Silas intended to use the town of Redemption's Rest as a base for controlling the surrounding territory, extorting merchants, and establishing himself as a ruthless power broker. Elias also learned about the gang's immediate plans, a cattle rustling operation near the Double X Ranch, intended to provide funds and distraction before the Silver Creek heist. He saw the brutality of Gus, the cunning of Pike the younger gang member, not the sheriff, and the silent, deadly efficiency of another member named Whisper, a weary man with an unnervingly quiet demeanor. He started subtly sowing seeds of doubt within the gang. During a planning session for the cattle wrestle, Elias mistakenly suggested a route that would take them through particularly difficult terrain, knowing it would delay them and cause frustration. He also accidentally left a sack of spoiled feed for their horses, leading to minor grumbling among the men. These were small acts, barely noticeable, but they began to chip away at the gang's cohesion. His true alliance, however, was forged in whispered conversations with Mav. She had witnessed the exchange with Silas and understood the dangerous game Elias was playing. One night, after the saloon had emptied, she approached him at the bar. "You're playing a dangerous hand, Cowboy," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Silas ain't one to be trifled with." "I know," Elias replied, looking at her. "But I can't just stand by. Not after what I saw. Not with what they're planning." He told her about Granger, about the Pinkerton agency, and the hidden silver. Mav listened intently, her eyes reflecting the dim lamplight. "My brother, he was on that stagecoach. He was one of the guards. They killed him." Her voice was tight with suppressed grief and fury. "I'll help you. Anything." Her willingness to help, born of personal tragedy and a thirst for justice, solidified their pact. Mav became his link to the outside, his messenger. She knew the comings and goings of the town, the gossip, the weaknesses. They devised a simple code, a series of seemingly innocuous questions or observations that would convey critical information. One tense evening, Elias was detailing the full scope of Silas's plans for the Silver Creek Bank to Mav, including the exact date and time, when a shadow fell across their table. It was Whisper, his eyes like cold steel, his hand hovering over the pistol at his hip. Silas wants to know what you two are whispering about, Whisper said, his voice a low hiss, barely above a whisper himself. Elias's heart pounded, but he kept his face calm. Just telling Mev about the cattle rustle tomorrow night, Whisper. Wanted to make sure she kept the drinks flowing for when you boys get back, celebrating your success. Mev, quick as a whip, chimed in. That's right. A big night, for big men. I'll make sure there's plenty of whiskey to go round. Whisper stared at them for a long moment, his gaze unnervingly penetrating, as if trying to peer into their souls. Then, with a curt nod, he turned and melted back into the shadows. Elias let out a slow, shaky breath. That was too close. Mev nodded, her face pale. Silas has eyes everywhere. We need to be careful. But we also need to move. That bank raid is coming sooner than you think. Elias knew it. The game was becoming increasingly perilous. Silas's trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered, and Whisper's suspicion was a venomous cloud hanging over them. He had to get information to Granger, and he had to do it before Silas's next move. The fate of Redemption's Rest, and his own life, hung by a thread, and the whispers of rebellion were growing louder, demanding action. Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. The air in Redemption's Rest grew thick with an unspoken dread, a tangible tension that settled over the dusty streets like a suffocating blanket. Elias, now deeply embedded within Silas's gang, felt it acutely. The cattle rustle had been a brutal success, reinforcing Silas's image of ruthless efficiency and further tightening his grip on the surrounding ranches. Now, all eyes, both within the gang and among the terrified townsfolk, turned towards the Silver Creek Bank. Silas, emboldened by his recent victories, was almost giddy with anticipation. Elias sat through the final planning sessions for the heist, his heart a cold knot in his chest. He learned the precise timing, a Tuesday morning, when the bank would be receiving a major gold shipment via armored wagon. He learned the exact layout of the vault from Sheriff Pike's detailed, albeit begrudgingly provided, blueprints. He saw the sheer audacity of Silas's plan, not just a smash-and-grab, but a full-scale assault, designed to leave no witnesses and no doubt as to who held power in the territory. We hit it hard, boys, Silas had roared, his scar a livid line across his face in the lamplight. Fast, clean, and no mercy. Once we have that gold, and the silver from Finch's Folly, this whole territory will be ours to command. Redemption's Rest will be the heart of an empire. Elias also learned of Silas's contingency plan for the Silver Creek heist, explosives. Pike, the younger gang member, was surprisingly adept with nitroglycerin. Silas intended to blow open the vault, and if necessary, the entire bank, to ensure no resistance. The thought sickened Elias. This wasn't just robbery, it was terrorism. He knew he had to act. The time for subtle sabotage was over. He needed to get the full details of the plan to Granger. That night, under the cover of darkness, he slipped out of town, heading for the dry well near the Twin Mesas. He scrawled a detailed message on a piece of paper, outlining the Silver Creek heist, the date, time, the gold shipment, Sheriff Pike's complicity, and the planned use of explosives. He folded it tightly and tucked it under a loose rock, praying Granger would find it. Back in town, he and Mev worked frantically. Mev, using her connections among the townsfolk, began discreetly spreading whispers of Silas's true intentions, not just robbery, but a reign of terror. She found a few brave souls willing to listen, Old Man Hemlock, surprisingly, who harbored a deep-seated hatred for outlaws after losing his family to a raid years ago, Jedediah, the stable boy, whose youthful bravado edged out his fear, and Martha, the quiet laundress, whose stern demeanor hid a fierce sense of justice. Their numbers were pitifully small against Silas's hardened gang, but they were determined. They gathered what meager weapons they had: old hunting rifles, rusty pistols, even pitchforks and axes. Elias, with Mev's help, began to train them in secret, teaching them basic tactical movements, how to hold a position, how to reload under pressure. It was a desperate undertaking, but they were fighting for their homes, their lives, their very souls. Adding to the chaos, internal strife within Silas's gang began to boil over. Elias's earlier, subtle manipulations were bearing fruit. Gus, perpetually resentful of Elias, clashed openly with Whisper during a discussion about their cut of the upcoming profits. Silas, in a fit of rage, lashed out at Gus, reminding him of his place. The incident created a palpable rift, a simmering resentment that Elias hoped to exploit. One evening, as Elias was making his way back to his room, he was cornered by Gus in a darkened alley. Gus's eyes were bloodshot, his face contorted with drunken fury. "You think you're so smart, don't you, Thorn? Wriggling your way into Silas's good graces. But I saw you at that canyon. And I know you ain't one of us." He pulled a bowie knife from his belt, the blade glinting ominously in the moonlight. "You're a snake, Thorn. And snakes get their heads cut off." Elias drew his Colt in a flash, the metallic click echoing in the alley. "Back off, Gus. You're drunk. You cause trouble now, Silas will be the one cutting off heads." Gus hesitated, the threat of Silas momentarily overriding his drunken rage. "You just wait, Thorn. Your time's comin'. Sooner than you think," he snarled, then stumbled away, disappearing into the shadows. Elias let out a slow breath, his hands still gripping his pistol. It was a clear warning. Gus's suspicion was growing into outright hatred, and it was only a matter of time before he made a move. Elias realized he might not have as much time as he thought before the Silver Creek heist. He needed to prepare for the inevitable showdown in Redemption's Rest. The storm was gathering, and it promised to break with devastating force. Chapter 8: High Noon in Redemption's Rest. The morning of the Silver Creek Bank heist dawned with a sky the color of ash, reflecting the grim mood hanging over Redemption's Rest. Elias stood on the dusty main street, his heart a drumbeat against his ribs, watching Silas and the main contingent of his gang ride out, heading east towards Silver Creek. Silas had assigned him and Gus to stay behind, along with Whisper and 2 other men, a skeleton crew to ensure no one in Redemption's Rest got any heroic ideas while the boss was away. It was a calculated risk by Silas, a test of Elias's loyalty, and a dangerous assignment that placed Elias directly in the path of the coming storm. "Remember, Thorn," Silas had said before riding off, his gaze sharp and unwavering, "any trouble here, and you'll be the first to answer for it. Don't disappoint me." As the last echoes of the horse's hooves faded, Elias knew his window of opportunity was now. Gus, his face a mask of simmering resentment, immediately settled into a saloon chair, nursing a bottle, his eyes fixed on Elias. Whisper, ever silent and watchful, positioned himself on the general store porch, his rifle cradled in his arms, surveying the street. Elias glanced at Mev, who was standing nervously in the saloon doorway, her face pale but resolute. He gave her a subtle nod. It was time. His first move was a calculated provocation. He walked deliberately towards the general store. "Whisper," he called out, his voice calm. "Silas asked me to check the supplies. He wants a full inventory before he gets back." Whisper's eyes narrowed. "Silas gave no such order to me." "Well, he gave it to me," Elias retorted, his hand brushing his Colt. "Unless you're going to argue with the boss's orders, I suggest you step aside." Whisper hesitated, caught between his ingrained obedience to Silas and his innate suspicion of Elias. Before he could decide, Elias saw Mev give a prearranged signal from the saloon doorway, a flicker of light from a mirror. It was Granger. He was close. "That's enough," Gus roared from the saloon, his drunken fury finally boiling over. "I knew you were no good, Thorn. Silas ain't here to protect you now." He burst out onto the street, drawing his pistol, his eyes blazing with murderous intent. "He's making his move," Mev screamed, her voice a clarion call. At her cry, the townsfolk, meagerly armed but united in their desperation, emerged from their hiding places. Old Nan Hemlock, wielding an ancient shotgun, took cover behind a water trough. Jedediah, the stable boy, clutched a rusty rifle, his knuckles white. Martha, the laundress, stood by her cart, a heavy iron in her hand, her face a mask of grim determination. "Now," Elias shouted, throwing his Colt. Gus fired first, the bullet whizzing past Elias's ear. Elias returned fire, aiming for Gus's shoulder, a non-lethal shot designed to incapacitate. Gus stumbled, roaring in pain, dropping his pistol. Whisper, reacting with lightning speed, raised his rifle and fired at Hemlock, who was aiming his shotgun. The old man cried out, clutching his arm, his shotgun falling to the dust. The other 2 gang members, roused by the gunfire, joined the fray, firing wildly. The street of Redemption's Rest exploded into a chaotic, desperate battle. Dust kicked up from the bullets striking the ground. Splintered wood flew from storefronts. Elias engaged one of the gang members, a young, nervous man, forcing him to take cover behind a wagon. He heard the fierce crack of Martha's iron connecting with a gang member's head. Suddenly, from the far end of the street, a volley of rifle fire erupted, precisely aimed, dropping one of Silas's men instantly. Then another, and another. Agent Granger, leading a small detachment of federal marshals and Pinkerton agents, rode into town, their badges glinting in the pale light. Federal marshals, lay down your arms, Granger's voice boomed across the dusty street. Whisper, seeing the overwhelming force, cursed under his breath, his eyes darting frantically. He made a desperate dash for his horse, trying to escape. Elias, however, was already moving, cutting him off, blocking his path. You're not going anywhere, Whisper, Elias said, his Colt aimed steady. Whisper, snarling, drew his own pistol, but before he could fire, Gus, nursing his wounded shoulder, tackled him from behind. A desperate act of drunken vengeance, or perhaps a twisted attempt to escape his own fate. They tumbled to the ground, struggling. The remaining gang member, seeing his comrades overwhelmed, threw down his weapon and surrendered. The battle for Redemption's Rest was swift, brutal, and decisive. The townsfolk, though shaken, cheered weakly as the marshals moved in, securing the prisoners. Elias stood amidst the dust and smoke, his Colt still warm in his hand, watching Granger and his men take charge. Maeve rushed to his side, her eyes wide with relief and a touch of awe. You did it, Elias. We did it. Granger approached him, his expression one of respect. Good work, Thorne. You held them off. The information you sent was spot on. We intercepted Silas's main crew heading for Silver Creek. He won't be hitting that bank. We got him and Gus and the rest of them. They're all accounted for. Elias felt a wave of exhaustion, but also a profound sense of satisfaction. The immediate threat was neutralized. Redemption's Rest was free. But then, a chilling thought struck him. All of them, Granger. Silas too. Granger's face tightened. Silas. He put up a hell of a fight. Used those explosives. He got away, Thorne. Injured. But he slipped through our net. A cold dread settled back in Elias's gut. Silas Blackwood was still out there, and he knew Elias was responsible for his downfall. The final reckoning was yet to come. The ghost of the canyon still rode. Chapter 9, Ashes and Vengeance. The aftermath of the battle for Redemption's Rest was a tableau of dust, exhaustion, and a fragile sense of victory. The federal marshals, led by Agent Granger, swiftly rounded up the remaining gang members. Gus, wounded and disoriented, was hauled away, cursing Elias with every step. Whisper, after a brief, violent struggle with Gus, was finally subdued and shackled. Sheriff Jedediah Pike, found hiding in his office, was stripped of his badge and placed under arrest, his face a mask of shame and fear. The townsfolk, battered but unbroken, slowly emerged, tending to their wounded and helping the marshals secure the area. Old Man Hemlock, his arm bandaged by Maeve, gave Elias a grateful, approving nod. Martha, the laundress, simply looked at him, her silent gaze conveying a world of thanks. The immediate danger had passed, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would linger. Elias, though weary, felt a surge of adrenaline. He knew his job wasn't done. Silas was still at large. Granger, we have to go after him, Elias urged, his voice strained. He won't let this go. Not after I exposed him. Granger nodded grimly. I agree. He's wounded, but dangerous. And he'll be thirsty for revenge. My men are already tracking him. But first, we need to sort through his hideout here. And I have a feeling we're going to find more than just stolen goods. They made their way to Silas's crude hideout, a reinforced cellar beneath the general store. Inside, amidst scattered supplies and a few strong boxes, Granger found a locked trunk. He forced it open, revealing not just gold coin and jewels, but a meticulously organized collection of ledgers and documents. Just as I suspected, Granger muttered, sifting through the papers. Silas wasn't just an outlaw, he was an orchestrator. These ledgers detail a vast criminal enterprise, protection rackets, land swindles, even illegal mining operations further north. And look at this. He held up a thick envelope. This is Finch's full estate documentation. And here, he pointed to a list, or roster of high-ranking territorial officials and wealthy businessmen, all of whom Silas was either blackmailing or had on his payroll. Elias felt a cold dread spread through him. The conspiracy was far wider and deeper than he had imagined. Silas was a kingpin, his tentacles reaching into the very fabric of the territorial government and economy. The murder of Eleanor Finch and the stagecoach robbery were not isolated incidents, but crucial steps in a grander scheme to consolidate power and wealth. The silver from Finch's folly was just one piece of a much larger, darker puzzle. He had dirt on everyone, Granger said, his voice low. This explains how he managed to operate with such impunity for so long. He wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing influence. He was trying to buy the territory. And if this information gets out, Elias began, it will cause a political earthquake. Granger finished, his expression grim. Careers will be ruined, fortunes lost, and reputations shattered. This is bigger than Silas now, Thorne. Much bigger. Suddenly a rider, one of Granger's marshals, galloped into town, his horse lathered. Agent Granger, we tracked Blackwood. He's headed for the Dead Man's Pass. He's making for the Apache lands, probably hoping to disappear into the territory where federal law has less reach. Dead Man's Pass, Elias muttered, his mind already calculating. A treacherous, narrow canyon notorious for rock slides and ambushes. A perfect place for a desperate man to make a final stand. He's going to try and regroup, or just make one last desperate run for it, Granger said, turning to Elias. I need to take this evidence back to the capital, alert the authorities. This is too important to risk. But Silas, he's your responsibility, Thorne. And mine. He'll never stop until he gets revenge on you for this. Elias knew it was true. Silas wouldn't rest. I'll go after him. He won't escape. Just be careful, Thorne, Granger warned. He's a cornered animal, and he's dangerous. And remember, you're not just after an outlaw now. You're after the key to a hornet's nest. As Elias prepared, Old Blue, Maeve approached him, her eyes filled with concern. Be careful, Elias. You've done enough. You don't have to face him alone. I do, Maeve, he replied, placing a hand on her shoulder. He won't stop. And until he's stopped, no one here is truly safe. This started with me, and it ends with me. He mounted Old Blue, his rifle secure, his Colt loaded. The sun was setting, casting long, crimson shadows across the battered town. Redemption's rest was free, but the shadows of vengeance still stretched across the land. Elias rode out, leaving behind the immediate aftermath, heading towards the looming final confrontation with Silas Blackwood. The weight of witness had evolved into the mantle of responsibility, and he would carry it to the very end. Chapter 10, The Reckoning and the Horizon. The journey to Dead Man's Pass was a desolate ride, a final trek into the heart of the unforgiving West. Elias pushed Old Blue hard, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues that mirrored the inferno within him. The pursuit of Silas Blackwood wasn't just about justice anymore, it was personal. It was about Eleanor Finch, about Redemption's Rest, and about the inescapable truth of you saw everything. Now you must take responsibility or we both perish. He reached Dead Man's Pass just as the last vestiges of twilight faded. The canyon was a jagged maw, silent and foreboding, its walls rising like skeletal fingers against the inky sky. Elias dismounted, leaving Old Blue hidden among some scrub brush. He proceeded on foot, moving with the stealth of a hunter, his senses heightened, his Colt drawn. He knew Silas would be injured, desperate, and therefore, more dangerous than ever. A flicker of light in the distance, deep within the pass, confirmed his suspicions. Silas had made camp. Elias moved closer, his boots crunching softly on the loose scree. He found Silas huddled by a small, sputtering fire, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face a grim mask of pain and fury. He was cleaning his rifle, his movements stiff but precise. Silas, Elias called out, his voice cutting through the stillness of the canyon. Silas flinched, then slowly, deliberately turned, his eyes burning with an almost feral intensity. Thorne, I knew you'd come. Thought you could hide behind your Pinkerton friends, did you? He laughed, a ragged, bitter sound. You're a fool, Thorne. A goddamn fool for sticking your nose where it didn't belong. You left me no choice, Silas, Elias replied, his voice steady. I saw what you did. What you were planning. Someone had to stop you. Stop me, Silas scoffed, struggling to rise. I was building an empire, Thorne. An empire that would have made men like you bow down and beg for scraps. And you, a worthless prospector, you ruined it all. His eyes narrowed, blazing with hatred. You saw everything. Now you'll pay the price for taking responsibility. He lunged, not for his rifle, but for a hidden Bowie knife, a flash of steel in the dim light. Elias, anticipating the desperate move, sidestepped, bringing his Colt to bear. Silas, moving faster than his injury suggested, slashed out, forcing Elias to block with his forearm, the blade tearing through his sleeve, a sharp sting of pain. Elias fired. The shot echoed deafeningly in the narrow canyon. Silas stumbled back, clutching his chest, a surprised look on his face. He staggered for a moment, then collapsed, falling heavily by the dying embers of his fire. He lay still, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring up at the vast, indifferent sky. Silas Blackwood, the architect of a bloody empire, was finally brought to his reckoning. Elias stood over him, his chest heaving, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving him feeling hollowed out. The fight was over. The man who had haunted his every waking moment, who had dragged him into this deadly dance, was gone. He searched Silas's pockets, finding nothing but a few coins and a tattered, blood-stained photograph, a faded image of a young woman and a small boy, their faces etched with a longing that seemed utterly out of place with the man Silas had become. It was a fleeting glimpse into a past that offered no answers, only more questions about the twisted path Silas had taken. He left the photograph on Silas's chest. Elias then returned to Redemption's Rest. He found Granger still there, meticulously cataloging the ledgers and documents. He informed the agent of Silas's demise. Granger nodded, his face solemn. It was inevitable. He would never have stopped. With the evidence from Silas's hideout, Granger returned to the territorial capital. The expose, as Elias had predicted, sent shockwaves through the region. High-ranking officials were arrested, corrupt businessmen exposed, and the network of intimidation and extortion that Silas had built began to unravel. The name Elias Thorne, once just a whisper in a saloon, became associated with courage and an unwavering commitment to truth. Redemption's Rest, though scarred, began the slow process of healing. The townsfolk, free from Silas's oppressive rule, started to rebuild, their fear slowly giving way to hope. Moev, now a symbol of resilience, became a central figure in the town's recovery, her spirit unbroken. Old Man Hemlock started prospecting again, his old eyes now holding a spark of optimism. Elias, however, found himself restless. He was no longer just a drifter, a solitary prospector. He had borne witness, taken responsibility, and fought for what was right. He had faced his demons, both external and internal. The West, while tamed in places, always held new horizons and new challenges. One morning, as the sun rose, painting the sky with the promise of a new day, Elias stood on the bluff overlooking Redemption's Rest. He looked at the bustling main street, at the sounds of laughter and hammer blows, signs of a town reborn. Maeve stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "What will you do now, Elias?" she asked, her voice soft. He looked out at the vast, untamed landscape, the endless expanse of possibility. "I don't know," he admitted, a faint smile touching his lips. "But I think I'll keep writing. Keep an eye out for places that need a little more than just a passing glance. Places where folks need someone to remember what they saw, and to take responsibility." He mounted Old Blue, his saddlebags lighter than before, but his spirit heavier with experience, purpose, and a quiet resolve. As he rode away from Redemption's Rest, leaving behind the echoes of its struggle and triumph, he carried with him the immutable truth of his journey. "You saw everything. Now you must take responsibility or we both perish." It was no longer a threat, but a creed, etched into the very soul of Elias Thorne, the silent witness who had found his voice and his purpose in the wild heart of the West.